let's take the theist first.
All right.
Joe wants to get our opinion on Canada. Looks like it is a Canada episode.
Apparently. Joe also called in last week and we had a really good conversation. So I'm glad you're calling back.
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
Hi, guys.
Hey, so what's going on? What did you want to get our take on?
This was, it was, I called in last week. Thanks for the convo last week, V.
Yeah.
And normally I don't call in 2 weeks in a row, but this is a story that I heard about, I think, on Tuesday, and it was such a bizarre story that that it was just, I couldn't help but immediately think, okay, I have to call Skeptic again this weekend.
What's going on?
This was a story that came out of Canada, Ontario, I believe, and one of the school districts there has a teacher who is transitioning to a woman, and a controversy stirred up when this teacher, who has not fully transitioned yet, started coming to school wearing humongous fake prosthetic breasts, like something that you would see in fetish porn websites.
Oh, I saw this on Twitter. Yeah.
And naturally, Fox and I'm pretty sure the Daily Wire have both already done short pieces about this. And Canada has the school district, at least, has stood behind the whole thing and said, no, this person isn't going to be fired, and they haven't really commented much beyond saying, no, we aren't going to fire this person. And it was just, that whole situation is so incredibly bizarre to me, because I consider myself an ally. And I realize I'm kind of the worst person to be calling in and talking about this as a cis white man, but it's just such a bizarre story, because in all honesty, that to me, that looks as though, like, when trans issues first started to become issues that were talked about frequently, there were people that you would expect who were freaking out saying, it's going to ruin everything, and just
it'll ruin all of the things, the beautiful things we have built.
Right.
Yeah.
It's standard reactionary bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But then I see this story and it's just like, ugh, because it almost comes across like, ironically, there's another story out of Canada. This one has kind of died quite a while ago. But there's another story out of Canada, which was the first kind of story that I came across that was a transitioning person. I cannot remember their name. Who?
Well,
I know what.
That's okay. Okay, can I jump?
I know what their male name was. It was Jonathan something.
All right.
And
their dead name. Yeah, let's talk about this story, because he gave us a lot there. So
okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm rambling.
That's okay. We've been doing this for years and we still ramble. So I looked up the story while you were talking, and my very first thought is, I have had teachers who look exactly like this. And I don't know. It's interesting. If you have a trans man who has got like a big old schlong, like, is that, oh God, I can see it is going halfway down his leg. Like, I had a shop teacher like that who was cis, and nobody said shit. I don't understand why people are focused on size of things, when the fact is it just makes I don't get it.
I do.
What do you get?
It's well, the term that is used is transmisogyny, but it is misogyny specifically towards a trans person, because what we are doing is now analyzing the transness of this person through a lens of misogyny. And this is not the first teacher to get in trouble for this kind of thing. And this is not the first teacher who was told by, conservatives on Fox News or wherever that, like, oh, you can't dress like that in front of kids. And it was just their body, right? And it was just this person had a hourglass figure that was, frankly quite impressive. And they just dressed like a normal person. And it is a problem that a lot of women in teaching spaces face specifically. And what we are talking about here is kind of a misdirection, right? Because we can talk about the transness of this person, right? And whether or not she, if this is a problem because she's trans, or like, is this a thing that just happens when you let trans people teach, or, that's not the problem. The problem is that conservative men have an obsession with controlling women's bodies, especially certain parts of them. And if you see them, that is a threat in some way, shape, or form. Does it matter if they are prosthetic? I don't know. I don't really care. Does it matter that she is trans? No. If this was a cis woman who walked in like this, the argument would still be, oh my goodness, how on earth could we possibly allow this? And you ask yourself, allow what? Like somebody to dress themselves and be in public? Like, what are you allowing here? Yeah. So what I would say about this story is that focusing on the transness of the person involved, the gender identity, is a misdirection. And what we need to be talking about is the fact that women, regardless of their, cisness or transness, do face this issue all of the time for teaching while being, attractive in some way, or having a large ass or large breasts. Like, it's
or my shop teacher, if you're watching this, Mr. Rickards. We all knew.
Oh my God.
We all knew.
This is getting inappropriate.
What?
All right.
Well, before we move on, though, we were getting a couple of comments in the chat that I do want to.
I do want to ask if Joe has a response to that, though.
I guess my thought, and I totally understand that that if a cis woman did it, then the conversation would be the same, and I'm with you, V, that I don't necessarily care that this person is trans. It's just I feel like this was they had to have known. But, you know what I mean? And not that they did it intentionally. It was like, oh, I'm going to wear huge prosthetic breasts and it's going to cause a shitstorm. But
I think we can all...
But at that point, it's kind of tone policing.
No, at this point, we get into the conversation of the model minority. And we get into the conversation of, at what point does somebody have to be self-limiting in order to represent a larger group effectively, or in a way that is not controversial to the majority. And that is a requirement that we only put on certain people, right? And so if this was going to be an issue regardless of this woman's gender, then what we need to be talking about is the issue and not the gender. And if what we do is say, well, if this was a cis woman, then we would just be rightfully upset about the fact that people are policing her body. But because it's a trans woman, shouldn't she have thought this through a little bit more? Or shouldn't she have done something differently? That becomes a conversation of, all right, what rights over someone's body or self-expression are we taking away because it would be better for society if they did it in this way, or better for community, PR if they present it in this. We get into some really sticky situations. And if we follow that through to its logical conclusion, it gets kind of ugly really quickly. So I get where you're coming from, but it's a dangerous path down that road, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because at that point it is, no, good call. Yeah. So Joe, as somebody who still views themselves as theist, is there a different approach or view to it that you have, or Where are you sitting on this?
I don't know. And I mean, I totally understand what V is saying regarding, the model minority and how that can become, unfortunately, a little bit of a slippery slope. But it's just like, let me give an example of religion. If Christianity if Christianity had just appeared in the last 50 years and it was something that was controversial when it very first appeared, and now it's starting to become more accepted, and not everybody's into it, but it's starting to become more accepted. And now there's, some controversies and some arguments between differing sides of, oh, Christianity is great and we should accept them, versus, oh, they're horrible and they're going to ruin everything. And then the Westboro Baptist Church shows up. It's
okay.
That's how I view it. And obviously this person didn't do what they were doing with the intent of causing a firestorm.
Well, also, it's not a hate crime like the Westboro Baptist.
Obviously.
Westboro
Baptist Church is the best example.
You're saying like, hey, like if I were in this position, I would have done it differently. That's fair. Cool.
Yeah.
That is 100% in your right to say that, right? Like, I would have done that differently.
Right.
If
and
I
that's
was in
also
that,
kind of hindsight being 2020.
Right. And it's just
else.
like, okay, well, Joe, if you come out tomorrow, if you realize that you are a trans woman and you get a teaching job, don't wear large prosthetic breasts, I guess. And you
make it normal.
But that's the thing. We cannot tell one way or the other. For this woman, she may have been making a statement. She may have just been following what she knew her body should look like. Mm. I can't speak to that. We cannot tell somebody to become a revolutionary for the greater good, and we also cannot tell someone to stop being themselves or stop identifying in certain ways because of the greater good, right? The greater good is a really bad excuse when the majority is the one deciding what the greater good is. So I hear you, and my takeaway from this is Joe would have done it differently, and that's fair.
And I honestly,
sure, and I guess that's kind of what it is at its core.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Can I take a stab?
Sure.
Yeah. Contextually, I think that media outlets look for extreme examples of things to try to paint the larger group with the extreme example that they find in order to disempower it or to
sure, it's sensationalism.
Sensationalism, there are a number of fallacies that are tangentially connected there. Mm-hmm. But kind of recognizing it for what it is definitely is important. There was one thing that came up in the chat really quick that I want to address before we move on to the next caller. And that was a few people had asked, I said dead name, and a couple of people are like, what the heck is that? And I realized that we're a show that people are finding every day. And so their access to conversations and experiencing conversations around these topics is not what we assume. So I just kind of want to offer up a quick definition for dead name for other people who may be watching who don't know what that is. People have other reasons. People can have a lot of different reasons to change their names. If you are transitioning, changing your name happens pretty often. When you change your name and go by a new name, you would hope that people would use your new name. When someone refuses or uses the quote dead name, the name that you had before, it's a way of invalidating. It's a way of saying, you're not really, you're somehow not who you say you are. It's this, it can be a really, really cruel way of singling somebody out, calling them by a name that they don't use or don't have anymore. So dead naming is simply using that old name. And we pointed out and we have a term for it because it has happened so much that we find that that definition is quicker and easier to have that conversation. Did I about hit that right?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, but in general, it's just a polite thing to do. In the same way that when someone gets married, you start referring to them to if it's a woman who gets married, takes her husband's name, you refer to her as the new name, Mrs. Whoever, Mrs. Smith, as opposed to Miss Jones. It's just like a thing you do, and it's just weird if you don't, because then it just becomes a situation where you're like,
do I hate your
I take
husband?
it. Or no, not even that. Just like, you probably don't know. Therefore, we aren't as close as I thought. Let me fill you in.
Right.
And if you keep doing it, you're just like, why isn't sticking for you? But Joe, that's going a little far afield.
Well, I just wanted to address it because I saw it going on in the live chat, and I wanted to make sure that if one person brings it up, that means there are 20 other people who are wondering about it. Joe, thank you for calling in. I listened to the conversation y'all had last week, and I'm really glad you're calling in. These are fun.
Thanks for taking me on again.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Bye.